Greetings and bienvenue. Hey, it's Dig again. I decided I'm going to keep a consistent schedule. Can you imagine that? So, episode 2 has been out for a bit, and I'm going to say this, the quality in this episode is already really good, so if you want to hear more negative reviews, I'm sorry, this is not going to be it. So far, the bar has been kept pretty high, and the first episode was already pretty good, so I'm really hoping that they keep up the standard, because, man, it's going to be hard for me to be critical of this series if it keeps up this level of quality. So, without wasting any time, let's get into the fray. The episode starts with Ace after he's just created his new world. He's basically made himself a celebrity that a bunch of girls swoon over, and even has the gall to hit on Sumiri right after she makes it very clear she's not interested. Keiwa, meanwhile, is watching the TV and sees Ace after his sister calls him. As a result, he does start to remember what happened in the first episode, but not the specific details. Eventually, he puts on the belt, and everything comes flashing towards him when he reaches the Sky Palace. We meet a shit ton of civilian riders, and they're given their first introduction to their new objective. Fight off a bunch of thief-themed versions of the monsters in a forest and obtain raise buckles to get to the next round. Before they enter though, they have to write down their desires on a card. Keiwa, of course, writing world peace. Because of fucking course he is. The game has many of the members struggle to even find any, with only 7 actually even finding any raise buckles at all. Geats doesn't even find his usual raise buckles, only finding armed water and armed shield. Keiwa during the game meets the man who rejected him at the interview, and reveals himself to be Kamen Rider Ginpen. He's basically fighting in order to help his son with his undescribed plot illness. However, at the end of the round, complications occur, and the 7 riders are forced to start the next round immediately, and are told to kill the head honcho. The game goes on while the competitors start going into their entry forms and putting on their buckles, and while they're all squabbling over each other, Keiwa ends up seeing Ginpen fighting off against the boss in a desperate attempt to try win. But, due to a previous conversation with the rest of the riders, ends up in a complete crisis over the fact that the game is a live-or-die situation, and unlike the citizens from the previous episode, he won't get revived if the world resets, and as a result, he's not able to help Ginpen, and he ends up getting his ass handed to him, which unfortunately means he dies. Gates then decides to manipulate Keiwa into giving him the boost buckle that he managed to get, and then defeats the monster, in boost water form. After defeating him, Geats decides to give Keiwa some heart-to-heart about the fact that he's a little too soft for his own good, and eventually ends the episode feeling pity for Ginpen and anonymously donating money for his son's surgery, under the name Anonymous Fox. This was an incredibly solid story. I'd say I was really intrigued about there being new objectives each round. The monsters aren't the only thing they have to worry about, but the tasks that they're also given. The fact we also get to see what determines a contestant's ideal world through the cards is actually pretty neat as well. The little details that the episode elaborates on is great, such as properly confirming that the boost buckle is a one-time power-up, and how the lobby is basically just a lounge where they all hang around but aren't allowed to fight due to the shady butler telling them they can't. Also, we haven't gotten a behind-the-scenes villain yet. For all these mooks we haven't gotten a single head honcho that controls the whole thing, and I'm generally quite glad we get to spend more time with our main characters and learn about how the Desire Grand Prix works. It's so much more interesting than spending time with some dickhead in a chair. Speaking of riders though, I didn't really touch on Mary and Danpan since I do think they weren't too prominent in this episode, but I'll quickly run by them. Mary is Morio Kagenea. He seems to be more of the older man who's still kinda young at heart, evidenced by him being willing to form an alliance with Neon instantly. He's played by Koji Abe. He's a comedian by trade, and he's actually had some experience in Toku, being in Ultraman Taiga before. Ginpen is Takahito Taira, a man carrying the burden of wanting to save his son, but unfortunately is still just an average middle-aged man, who's obviously way out of his league here. He's played by Tomoharu Hasegawa. Notably, he was a filming director in episode 41 of Ryusoulger, which is quite interesting that we're getting someone who's experienced in Toku but wasn't an actor. Danpan is Kanato Sumida, who is an actual panda this time. Sorry for that error last episode. Shiroe is a polar bear. You can see how this gets confusing when the only difference between their main suits is literally just the color of their ears. In regards to his actual personality, he's another cocky dickhead character, who compared to Buffa, who's just incredibly hostile and aggressive towards the other riders, this dude is just more snarky and a bit dickish compared to Buffa. Granted, considering he has to share a slot with Buffa, and he seems like he's going to be a bit more of a manipulative character, I think he's likely going to be the next to go. He's played by Ryunosuke Miyamoto. He's a member of a J-pop band called Battle Boys Tokyo, and has even been in a lot of advertisements and played a character called Shun in Gundam Build Real. Getting back to some of the other characters, Neon thankfully got a lot more interactions with Kea. We're getting to see a bit more of an awkward side to her, and we see this through her willingness to ally with Mary right off the bat, just because of the fact that she obviously didn't sign up for these dangerous stakes just like Kawa. But man, Ginben dying was a shock, because while I expected him to die, I did not think we'd be getting yet another death this quickly. I thought they would drag it out a bit before they killed him. It was sad to see him like this, though I am really hoping that this death is not a fake-out. Please, for the love of God, make the deaths permanent. Especially since it'll make the money that Geats spent feel so much less meaningful, since I want him to have that Zolda moment. And speaking of Geats, I'm looking forward to seeing how he justifies his motivations for pushing Keiwa to do better at the game by deliberately acting like an asshole. There has to be a reason, but God knows we will have to wait. Now, I realize I didn't mention fights before in the first episode. They were really good, but man, this one really hypes it up. This episode really uses the environment quite effectively, notably with the armed water buckle. Its usage is incredibly versatile throughout the fights. Geats uses it with lakes and even the fucking trees to get better water sources for his attacks. The javelin thrown at the tree was something that just completely astounded me. I'm so glad that they're using the environments for more than just set dressing and actually using the scenery. The fights are also really good at displaying different physicalities or strats that the riders use, especially when they use certain buckles. Danban, for example, actually obtained Magnum, which is the reason that Geats couldn't use his base form in this episode. And unlike Geats, who was way more aggressive and offensive when he used the 40x shooter, he instead chooses to hang out in the trees and snipe from above away from the enemy's range. That kind of stuff is cool to me. Even looking at Buffa, his fighting style is so much more aggressive compared to all the other riders, and just goes in head first. Even the CGI in this episode wasn't intrusive. Like, the first episode had the monsters, but in the fight scenes it was pretty fine. They were sparing with it. But in this episode, my god, that fucking rider punch was so nice. I'm so glad that we're getting more finishers than just kicks. Honestly, this show is finding ways to just completely appeal to me in every single way, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how the riders use each other's power-ups to complete these differing objectives. I mean, we're already seeing that Geats is going to be using Zombie next episode, which is finally going to put Buffa at a bit of a disadvantage. And before I leave, the opening. Trust Last, really hype. I'm so glad that they got Shodan no Kaze to come back and do a Kamen Rider opening, and even getting Komi Koda to join in. It's getting stuck in my head. Honestly, that's all I have to say about this episode. It's a great episode built on an already great foundation. Frankly, I'm looking forward to seeing more. Hey, if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing and pressing the bell for notifications. I'm really looking forward to growing this channel and would love some feedback. Hopefully you enjoyed what you've seen. So long.